You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Hey, what is up, YouTube? It is Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, coming to you live here on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and X, all kinds of places, over on Twitch as well. And we're doing things a little bit differently this week. If you're watching from my channel, we're streaming over on the Bronze Age Nerd YouTube channels that I have out there. We're also live over on the EXP. So usually at 7:30 p.m. Pacific, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, this is a show called The Devil's Advocates we do over on the EXP. We had a unique opportunity to have a guest on this week, so we're going to bring the guest on in a second here, and I'm really excited to talk to him and get to know him a little bit better and share some of his experiences in the comics he's worked on with you guys. But this is kind of a fun little thing we're doing where we're going to, be able to kind of talk to both channels at the same time. I really wanted him to have the exposure, it's over on my channel. And I really wanted to, everybody over on my channel, I wanted you guys to be able to check out what we do over on the EXP, kind of see what's going on over there. And if you're watching on the EXP, awesome. You're already in a great spot to watch a lot of great comic book content over on any of the channels we're streaming on right now. So thanks for being here. We got GT Key Comic in the chat, holding it down as usual. I always appreciate that. Thanks, GT Key. Our guest tonight is going to be a gentleman named Frank Martin. And we're going to bring him on in a second here to talk about some comic books he has coming up and some comic books he's worked on in his career. It should be really fun. If you're watching out there and you have any questions, please throw them into chat. I'd love to see your questions that you might have for Frank. It could be questions specific to him, could be questions you have for people in the comic book industry or people that are writers in general. I would absolutely love to see that. Just realize that if I see your question in the chat, I'm probably going to save it until I have a good break in the conversation to ask it later. So if you see me ignoring your question, don't worry. We will get to it later on in the show. So with that said, with no further ado, I would like to bring my guest into the show. Our guest today is the writer Frank Martin. Let's bring him into the show right now. Hey, Frank, how's it going?
Good. I love being described as a unique opportunity. That's
yeah, no, absolutely.
Title. I'm going to put that on my business card. Frank Martin, unique opportunity.
Frank, unique opportunity, Martin, the writer guy. I think that would be perfect. Well, hey, welcome to the show. I understand that you are currently in a different location than probably most of the rest of us. Are you willing to talk about that a little bit?
A little bit. I'm from New York. My wife planned an impromptu trip to Puerto Rico, which is where I am. I'm currently in the lobby, but all comic creators know that we don't take vacations. You're constantly working and doing stuff. So I decided to just jump down to the lobby and be on the show and talk about all the fine comics that we have going on.
That's awesome. I love that you described it as you're in the lobby of Puerto Rico too, by the way.
The lobby of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, the lobby. No big deal. So kind of an impromptu trip. Has it been fun down there? Is it going well so far?
Yeah, you know what? It's weird because it rains and then it's super hot and then it rains and then it's super hot. But my kids don't care. They don't know where they are. They're just happy to jump in a pool. That's all that matters. It's warm and they can go in a pool. So I've been trying to make the most of it. It's been nice so far. I got about 2 days left of the trip. And a couple shows that I scheduled that I wasn't planning on doing from an island in the Caribbean, so it should be interesting.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's funny you said the weather. That my weather experience today has been snow, sun, rain, to snow, to rain again. So kind of all over the map here too. But I guess it's just that time of year where it doesn't know what to do, no matter where you're at in the northern hemisphere.
Par for the course for our foreseeable future.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly. Hey, Collector P, thanks for coming to the show tonight. We appreciate you being here. And Fuzzy Donut is over watching on Instagram. I appreciate that, Jay, because I can't see Instagram right now. Because if I played it, I'd probably have the audio echoing. It'd be a nightmare. So Instagram comments, please leave your comments and questions there. Jay, our producer, is going to feed those into the chat as needed, and we will get those questions answered as well. So we're here with Frank. Frank's taking a generous amount of time out of his Puerto Rican vacation to talk to us today. Frank, what I would love to talk to you about, the way I love to talk to writers to start out talking in an interview, is I'm always fascinated by comic book writers, particularly. You know how a lot of kids want to be astronauts, a lot of kids want to be, race car drivers or doctors. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a comic book writer. So I love talking to comic book writers. And one of the things that I always wonder about is what did the beginning of your comic book journey look like for you as a young Frank, the writer? What did that look like, and how did you get into comic books?
It's kind of weird because I didn't come into comic book writing from the comic book side. I came in from the writing side, the storytelling side, writing novels and short stories and prose. And I thought that's how everybody did it. And then when I met other people, they're like, no, that's not how it worked. We wanted to be comic writers, and that's how we pursued it. But I've always been a fan of stories and storytelling. And so I've written prose stories, fan fiction, but I've always read comics. And then some point in time, around college age, I said, you know what? I like reading these comic books and I like writing stories. Why don't I just try writing comics? Like, it can't be that hard. Turns out it is kind of hard. And it took me a while to figure it out, to crack the code, if you will. I'm still cracking the code. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I feel a lot more comfortable crafting stories, one-shots, mini-series. And so I came to it from that storytelling side of, I like telling stories. Let me try this new medium that I've enjoyed my entire life.
Okay, so yeah, let's approach it from that angle then. So you started out kind of writing more in a general sense, is what I'm hearing. And so what took the leap from Frank wanting to read to Frank wanting to write? Like, was it as a teacher? Was it a class? Was it a passion on your own time? Like, what started that?
I don't really remember. I mean, it was like I said, it was my college days, which are kind of hazy. All of those brain cells are more or less dead.
Right.
But I remember I took a comic writing class and I wrote a short story, as they do in comic writing class. They say start small, do a short story, and it was about an angel who was kind of talking to a bartender who turned out to be the devil. And it was that was the story that I came out of the class with. And from there, I really liked the script. Everybody said it was great, but you can't do something with just one short story. You have to find like a particular anthology that it could go into, which is rare and it's never really the case. So from there, I took that idea and I'm like, you know what? This would be good if I took this theme of angels and demons and like Ghost Rider-ish Constantine stuff and I just ran with it. And I did a whole bunch of other short stories in that vein, and that became my first real series, which was Modern Testament. And it was when you have a whole bunch of short stories, you can collect them into an anthology, and that became my first real work that I put out into the world. Was a whole bunch of shorts that I was able to collect together and make into sort of a series.
Right on. So you mentioned Ghost Rider, you mentioned Constantine. I am kind of curious. Again, I'm going to approach it more as the writer of prose and fan fiction who turned into the comic book writer. What were some of your favorite authors to read? Was it primarily fiction, by the way, or did you have an interest in kind of all types of literature?
It's weird that I wrote a lot of prose during that time, but I read a lot more comics. I grew up in the early 2000s, so this was big when Bendis was architecting Marvel along with Mark Millar.
Yeah.
They did Civil War, New Avengers, that kind of stuff. So those were the way they approached the universe as some big story that needed to unfold over time. That's what really drew me in. And that's how I really approach comics. And that's what I loved about the medium, was that it was this long form storytelling, that they could take all these characters in the same universe and yet somehow tell a cohesive story that they were all individually going through. It was something very unique that I think comics now, it doesn't have that same kind of magic, but that's what drew me in, is the fact that it was like a wave of the Marvel universe.
Oh, we think we lost Frank for a second there. Let's see if he cuts back in here. Right now we're in the middle of the wave is what I'm seeing. Make sure it's not just me here. Oh, there we go.
Am I
We
back?
caught you in the wave. I think is kind of where we were at when you kind of slipped out for a second. Otherwise, you've been good actually. So that's
Hotel Wi-Fi.
yeah.
No, I was just saying how they designed the Marvel Universe to be a big wave, and each character was riding that wave in a different way, is basically what I was trying to articulate.
For sure, man. For sure. I mean, one thing that's interesting is I think, one thing we should do pretty early in the show here is kind of set the scene a little bit here. So you do have a new comic book that's coming out soon. We didn't really time this perfectly to the point where the Kickstarter is launched yet, but it is going to be launching within about a week, right?
Yeah, March 5th, which is, I guess, 5th. a week from tomorrow.
And that's Phenom.
Yeah. Phenom is my first superhero story, which is strange considering I've launched so many projects.
It is pretty crazy. For those that want to bookmark the site, I do have the Kickstarter preview page linked down below in the description, as well as a couple of socials, Frank's website and his X page, so you can go follow him over there as well. X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days. And Jay's throwing the link in the chat right now. So if you want to go check out that page and kind of get a real, it hasn't launched yet, so it's still kind of in that pre-launch phase. But that is part of the reason that we have Frank on now. Again, the timing wasn't super perfect because to the point where we can't preview the Kickstarter and all that kind of stuff in full. But I did want to mention that so people that are kind of wondering what can I go check out. I think that's a great place to go bookmark, get started, get ready to jump on the launch when it happens. But yeah, you have a lot of stuff under your belt. And it is funny, to talk about big arcs and big stories, and really you've had, from what I can tell, a lot of kind of eclectic kind of different things that you've done out there. So
eclectic is a good word. I like that one.
Yeah, and what I was curious, is that something that has that happened completely organically as stories have come to mind, or is that more of the spec for what you've kind of been handed for certain things to write, or how has that kind of happened that you've had this kind of really kind of I guess all over the place kind of style of writing for different things?
I have writer ADHD a little bit, where I want to tell stories, and I want to tell so many stories, and I have so many ideas, and I could obviously take any one of these projects and expand it to a mini series or a 6-part series, but I just want to tell so much. And so I kind of, in the early part of my comic writing career, I kind of focused on one-shots, like one and dones, where I could just tell the story, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, move on to the next one. And I described them as itches. I had these itches that I had to scratch. And once I scratch it, I get another itch, and I just kind of scratch all over my body before I know it. And I have all these different stories that are kind of all over the place, which from a creator standpoint, it becomes a little difficult because it's hard to build momentum when you're shifting gears so much and doing so many different things. But looking back, it's great to have such a wide variety. When somebody approaches me and says, "Frank, what do you write?" I'm kind of like, "Well, what do you like?" At this point, I have sci-fi, noir, comedy. I got a lot of different things that I could approach to people and tell them, "Look, if you like certain things, I can write this thing. And hopefully if I like this thing, you'll like this other thing that I'm doing." So it's a give and take based on building momentum with one series or showing people my range.
Okay. Now, having written a little bit of all these different genres or forms of fiction, is there something that you feel most at home doing, or is it still something where it just depends on the itch that day, or how does that work?
I love this question because it's always horror for me. I don't know why. I was a Blockbuster kid. I grew up in the horror section of Blockbuster, and also the sci-fi section which was a lot of horror too. For some reason, when at Blockbuster, I feel like whenever they had something, they didn't know where to classify it. They just dumped it in the sci-fi section, which a lot of times it became scary. But there was something for me about the depravity of horror. The scariness and the channeling our inner basic instincts of humanity that I just love. I love diving into that, the depth of our souls and what's the darkest of us, and just reveling in it and loving it. And there's so many different aspects of horror. You know, there's serial killer horror and sci-fi horror and monster horror and obscure Twilight Zone horror that I love that scariness, because there's something about humans wanting to be frightened that attracts me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's weird because I historically horror, especially films, books were a little bit different for me, but horror was a genre that I came to later in life. I'm 41. I didn't really start enjoying, especially horror films, until probably my 30s. And I know a lot of people, it's an earlier round kind of thing, but it's funny you mentioned the supernatural creature, kind of horror stuff, because really I looked back on it. I'm a huge science fiction fan. I've been science fiction my entire life. I've been a massive fan. And if you really start to look at it, a lot of the sci-fi stuff I was watching really is kind of almost like horror / fiction, right? Like Predator or Deep Star 6 or like these creature feature kind of movies that had a science fiction Leviathan, a lot of the deep sea movies for some reason. But yeah, they had that kind of weird horror element where there was a monster or a creature or, aliens or something like that were killing people or attacking people. But also they had this kind of like science fiction kind of slant that I really kind of gravitated towards. And I just realized like later on in life, like, oh yeah, it's really that just a lens to tell the story through. And as long as the story is good, it doesn't really matter like what the dressing is. That's just the fun part, right?
Yeah, people tend to think that horror is like being terrified and super afraid, which is it's could be that, but it's also sometimes just submitting to something that's greater than ourselves and like cowering before it. And it was funny because I was just talking to my son today about H.G. Wells, who's the father of modern science fiction, and we were talking about War of the Worlds, which if you think about it, aliens invading from space, completely destroying our planet and taking everything over. That's pretty scary stuff. It's not meant to be horror, but it's just cowering before this insurmountable obstacle that in War of the Worlds is defeated by like these tiny little things.
Well, no, and it's funny because psychological horror is always like 10 Cloverfield Lane or I'm thinking of like movies and stuff, but a lot of that kind of horror has always been my favorite. You think about even like Night of the Living Dead, like it's not really that the zombies are the scary thing. Like, yeah, sure, they're in front of you and they're scary, but it's the idea that the people around you might be scarier than the zombies that you're fighting, that kind of thing, right?
Even quote unquote horror that takes a comedic approach to it is still great stuff, like Shaun of the Dead and Zombieland. It takes a traditionally horror genre, which is zombies, and finds a way to spin it and make it fun and light for people that might not want to be scared, but it's still horror. You're dealing with an apocalypse, so the genre spans so much, and that's where I love to play in. But you know what? I love rom-coms and high fantasy and all that other stuff too. I love stories in general.
So there is a question I have saved in chat. Don't worry, I will get to it. But I did have along this line, I had another question. So I wanted to get to that before we get to our first little ad break coming up. What is a genre or like a specific type of story that you haven't told yet that you do look forward to writing one day? Like, high fantasy or whatever it might be, right? Like whatever's out there. What's the one thing that's kind of like your Moby Dick at this point?
A year or so ago, somebody asked me that, and I said rom-com, and then I accidentally put out a rom-com. Like, I don't know, what haven't I done yet that I would love to do. I haven't really done like a high fantasy thing, Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, that type of stuff. Just straight traditional fantasy. I've always taken fantasy and applied it in a different way.
Yeah.
So, I would love to do something like that. That would be something completely new and unique and different for me. I was never really a Tolkien fan growing up. Some kids are just Tolkien fanboys and they just dive into that Lord of the Rings universe. And although I enjoy it, I liked playing Warcraft as a kid, and I enjoy all those types of movies. I can't find myself to just write a story strictly in that kind of vein. I always want to dovetail into something else. It's going to be high fantasy, but it's going to be sci-fi too, or horror. I can't just strictly stick to that one thing. So maybe
I almost had a hard time taking it seriously in some kind of way, and I don't mean that as a slight to any fan of it. I actually have become a Tolkien fan, and George R.R. Martin has done kind of that new style of fantasy that isn't necessarily the high fantasy, and that's kind of helped me appreciate that stuff, kind of looking at it from a historical standpoint. But I never could get into like Robert Jordan, Wheel of Time, or that kind of it's just sort of like this really dry kind of seeming thing to me almost. And again, no offense to people that are fans of that, but I can completely understand why you might want to take that concept if you're not into it and sort of meld it into something else and kind of make it about something else in a way.
I same concept. I don't want to kind of limit it, but it's been done. Tolkien inspired so many people to write so much high fantasy that it's kind of like, what can I add to the genre that hasn't been done before? It's hard, So
Right.
I to dive into it and try to carve my own path through it. I would just find it to be difficult.
I completely agree. It's one of those things that as a fan, as a viewer, as a reader, depends on it. It's really tough for me to really wrap my head around it compared to some other things. Like I know that this is a little bit of a different thing, but it took me a while to watch that new Dungeons and Dragons movie, even though I knew it was like a blockbuster popcorn flick, just because I have almost like an aversion to that kind of.
It was
style.
good.
It was good. Yeah.
I watched it with my family. We had a great time, but it's just a fun story, they're not carving any new ground. They're not.
100%.
They're not pioneering some uncharted territory of storytelling. So, but I had a great time with it. It was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's the thing is I guess for me that became more palatable knowing that it's almost like a different thing and fantasy. That said, we are coming up on our first ad break here. So we're going to take a quick ad break to talk about some of the things that are sponsoring the EXP, and also some things that are coming up on the EXP. So we're going to take an ad break for that, and then we're going to come back, and I have some questions that I want to ask you coming in from the chat. So we will get to those burning questions folks have. So stay tuned and check out this short ad break, and we'll be right back with you.
Did you know that every experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out, twitch.tv/the_EXP. Or just scan that QR code.
Imagine being at a convention and going to an interview panel that's just for you. No bustling crowds, no hours-long lines, just you, the moderator, and your favorite comic book creators. Well, this is pretty much that. Miss Jen sits down every week with 2 comic book creators for a live stream interview about their latest work, and you can ask them whatever you want. It's Talking Shop, Mondays at 5 Eastern on The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales. There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
Awesome. Welcome back to the show, everybody. If you are just joining us, This is the Devil's Advocates. Normally, this show is myself and co-host producer Kyle. However, this week we have a special guest, which is Frank Martin, joining us from Puerto Rico, which is very, very extravagant. So I really appreciate that. Now, Frank is awesome enough to join us, even though he's in the middle of a vacation, to talk about his career and also an upcoming Kickstarter launch he has coming up for his first superhero comic book called Phenom. There is a link in the description below. Before we left for the ad break, we did have a couple of questions come through chat, primarily one that I want to address. Viewers of EXP might be familiar with the EXP's often guest host, Chuck Pano. We would like to know, how did you meet Chuck, and how did the idea to do your Hangouts come about, Frank?
You burped there a little bit. I got the end of it, which was said, okay. How did my idea to do Hangouts come about?
So the question was, how did you meet Chuck, and how did the idea to do your Hangouts come about?
I've known Chuck for a couple of years now. We've both been in the indie comic creator scene. And you know, there's just some people you just connect with. I think Chuck just connects with everybody. That's just like his superpower. He just meets people and just finds a way to connect with them. Why did my idea to do Hangouts with him come about? Chuck's in the middle of a move right now, so we're a little bit of a hiatus. But the idea was, so I've taken a social media break from this year. I've kind of stepped back from just posting all the time on Twitter and Facebook, but I still wanted to be kind of present. I still wanted to have a face. I didn't want people letting me know that I disappear. So talking with Chuck, I kind of approached him. I said, look, you know, the concept of like a group of old guys that just go to the diner and have coffee like in the middle of the day, and they just like catch up with each other. That was kind of an idea that I pitched to Chuck. I was like, we're not going to have a show. We're not going to like have any set agenda. We're just going to stream in the middle of the day and just talk about anything. And he's like, done. I'm sold. So that was the idea. Just a bunch of old guys having coffee in a diner. And so that was the concept I pitched him. And he was like, sure. So in the middle of the day, when Chuck and I are free, there's no set schedule. It might be 12 o'clock. I mean, we try to do it at the same time, but if he's like, I'm running late, I'm like, all right, sure, whatever. It's super informal. We just hit live and we just talk about whatever. There's no set thing. And then if people want to jump on, we put the link in the chat and people can jump on and just come hang out with us. So that was the basic idea behind it, not to have it like be an official show, just me and Chuck just talking, discussing whatever shows we watch, things that are on our minds. And we kind of just try to do it whenever we have time. So it was super informal thing that, that's kind of it. There's really nothing that's special to it.
You know, it's funny you say that, actually, because honestly, that's something that I think is on a lot of people's minds right now in a way. Like you're actually bringing up a topic that it's really kind of close to a lot of people's hearts. And that is, you talk about taking a break from doing social media. And there's a lot of people right now that have been, taking a break from social media, quitting certain platforms. You hear, a lot of people right now are watching on YouTube. When it comes to YouTube, there's a lot of famous YouTubers that have been doing, million plus subscribers, doing it for years, that are quitting the platform right now, or quitting doing videos. And there's a lot of that kind of sentiment out there right now. So it's kind of interesting you put that in a way where it's like, okay, let's not have the whole script. Let's not have an agenda. Let's not have anything formal to it. Let's just go live and stream and kind of BS and let people come on and talk and that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of people who can identify with that right now, man. I think that's totally something that people are looking for more of now.
Since I've stopped doing it, I feel better. I find I have more time because I'm not getting sucked into that scroll. I think that evolutionarily speaking, I mean, we're getting to deep stuff here, but that's cool. Humans weren't meant to communicate through long, big chains of text, just going back and forth like that. Humans were meant to look at each other, see each other's facial expressions, our eyes, or communicate with our voice. And I think we need to get back to that a little bit. And even though we can't do that in person, we could still do that like this, live streaming. So I think Chuck was on the same page with that. So let's just, screw all this text back and forth. Let's just go live. If you can't do it in 1 week, fine. We're not
Yeah.
holding her accountable. We're just kind of like, if you want to do it on like a Monday in the middle of the day, let's just hang out and just talk about whatever. So I think that goes a long way with people trying to reconnect on a human basis rather than the whatever term social media wants us to do it.
No, I completely agree. And like I said, I think that's actually surprisingly something that's kind of in the zeitgeist right now is that concept. And it's weird. I mean, I'm somebody who I never thought that would be a problem for me because I because of some different situations I tend to prefer text-based communication, at least intellectually. Turns out, when I actually go to do that, it may not be always the best thing. I think during the pandemic, for example, there was a lot of that happening, and it was kind of cool when that was an option. It's kind of not cool when that's the only way you can do it, right? When you're forced to do it, it's not so great. And I think a lot of people experienced different things that kind of converged into that similar concept of, hey, maybe this isn't the healthiest or best thing for me.
There's that great Key and Peele skit where they're texting back and forth. And one of them is thinking it's fun. Oh, yeah. And they're texting. And the other guy's getting super mad and angry. What you mean by that? It's there's no context when you are just sending text back and forth. So I want to try to do stuff like this, talk to people more. And that was the basis for me reaching out to Chuck and saying, look, let's just try to do a weekly thing where we just talk to each other.
For sure. No, that's cool. And so for people that may not know, what's the best way to stay on top of making sure they catch the next stream when it does happen?
I've had this question before, and the answer is just be Facebook friends with me and Chuck. We send our streams to Facebook. They're spontaneous. We try to go, I think Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern is our set time. But Chuck texts me and is I'm running an hour late. I'm okay, we don't tell anybody. We just kind of just pop up an hour later. So it might be a day before, it might be a day early. It's just kind of, it ruins the spontaneity of the thing if we have a set time to it. So it's so super informal that that's what makes it fun, is how informal it is.
Nice. And that's, I'm glad you said that, because that's how I caught one 2 weeks ago, I think, or something like that. And that was how I was able to catch it. I was Facebook friends with both of you guys. So I highly recommend friending up Frank over on Facebook, friending up Chuck over on Facebook, and then you should be able to find the stream that way.
I've gotten that reaction from people where they're just on Facebook and they're oh, Frank and Chuck are live. It's that. It's kind of they don't have to think about it. It's just oh, there they are.
Well, and then that's my version of the social media thing. It's I don't have any notification, online notification alerts for anything. No YouTube channels, nothing. So even if there was a way to do that, I would not do it, because that's the one that stresses me out. Is oh, they're going live. I have to go watch right now. But if I'm online and I see that it's live, hey, cool, I'll go hang out. It's that weird thing for me that makes a big difference.
That's that great thing about the thing that Chuck and I do, is that even if it says 0 viewers, we'll still just talk, because we just talking to each other. So it's it doesn't matter if it's 100 people or nobody, we're still saying the same stuff. And the fact that I know that it's resonating with people is that even my wife is I love when you talk to Chuck. I'm okay, she doesn't like anything I do, but for some reason when me and Chuck just gab back and forth, she enjoys it.
Nice. I do want to get to a couple other questions from chat. One of them is from some joker from the EXP. Oh, sorry, not that one. This one. It's really not. I don't think it's really quick, but we could answer it. It's if Captain America's shield is vibranium, what is Hawkeye's shield? Quicksilver. It is not a good joke, but it is a joke, and I do want to acknowledge it. I saw the question mark and I got excited, so I marked it. But I feel we need to acknowledge that Jay made that joke. However you see fit.
The funny thing is that this is strictly a joke. Am I still here?
It's strictly a what now?
I was saying this is strictly an MCU joke. If you're a straight comic book fan, this doesn't make much sense. But if you love MCU, you know what? this actually hurts because I was a big fan of. I wouldn't say I was a big fan, but I was disappointed when they didn't really capitalize on the whole Quicksilver thing with WandaVision more.
Yeah, 100%. They did that thing where they brought in the actor from the Fox
I
films.
thought they could have done a better job with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it was
They
kind of
did.
interesting.
It was a
but
good.
It wasn't enough.
No,
Oh, sorry, we're having
there
some
was a
connection
lot
problems.
more
I'm
they
sorry.
could have done.
Yeah,
No, it's okay. It was an interesting idea that they didn't really capitalize on. So it's a sore subject for us MCU fans that hope that that twist was going to be more.
that's funny. That's actually how and I'm not one of those people who like comes on and just hates on the MCU all the time. But I do think that that's a really good way to describe a lot of the recent MCU is there wasn't enough capitalizing on good opportunities recently.
Yeah. I'm not an MCU hater. I'm definitely an MCU fan. I love a lot of the stuff they've done. The current phase gets a lot of hate. I've enjoyed a lot of the stuff they put out, more or less. So I'm definitely not gonna hate on what they've been doing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's one of those things where it's like, I think that there's more of it, so it's easy to kind of say that it's slipped in quality maybe a little bit, but the stuff that's good is still good in my opinion.
Yeah.
But getting back to
anything
you
that goes on long enough, you're gonna find some backlash too.
Totally, 100%. Sean has a question for you. I think this is a good question. We maybe kind of tackled a little bit of this earlier, but maybe you have a specific answer for Sean here. Where do you feel most of your writing inspiration comes from?
This is an interesting question because I think a writer's job is to ask what if. That's where I get a lot of my story ideas from. Like, what if a raccoon could fly? Just like random stuff like that. So most of my inspiration just comes from going throughout the day, just like having random crazy thoughts that I just run with, and just ideas and just general concepts. It's just looking at my own kids, looking at my wife and my own relationships, questioning them, pondering what if this, what if that. That's really where the basis for all my stories come from. And a lot of times they're nothing. I'll write down the what if question, and I'll put a pin in it, and it will just sit there forever, and I'll never do anything with it. Other times I'll take that what if question and I'll expand it into an entire comic book that I'll decide to launch on Kickstarter. There's no rhyme or reason to it, but I think questioning the world around us and asking things that
We'll see if I don't know about anybody else, but for me, Frank froze for a little bit there.
we broke up for a second, and we broke up for a second, and I thought that was a really good answer. So I thought you got all of it.
I unfortunately lost you on my end for about 15 seconds, I think. But I think we got most of the answer there.
Yes, I basically just questioning everything is kind of where my inspiration comes from. Not taking anything for granted, imagining the impossible is the best way I could describe it.
And so it sounds like, and this is actually a question that I was going to ask anyway, so it leads right into this perfectly. It sounds like you're somebody who like a prompt or an idea or what if, as you said, comes in your head, and you write it down. Like, you physically write it down, or do you kind of mentally catalog it? Like, what's your system?
Sometimes the weird thing is sometimes an idea pops into your head and it just goes away, and like nobody. So I call Chuck my idea dumpster. Sometimes I'll have an idea that's too good to just keep to myself. I'll just text it to Chuck and he'll go, "That's awesome, man." And then that's it. I leave it at that and I forget it. I just need somebody else to share in this idea. Other times I will. I'll go.
The idea dumpster is fantastic.
That's not the first time I've described him as that, but but like everybody loves that. I just call Chuck my idea dumpster. It's where my ideas go when I don't want them to go anywhere else. But other times, you know what? I'll put it in my phone, and then I'll say like, maybe there is something to that. So Yeah, I feel like I come up with 10 ideas a day that just get lost into the ether. You know, it's just I live in imagination. A lot of times my wife will be looking at me and she's like, "What are you thinking of?" And I'm like, "You don't even want to know." Like you don't want to know where my mind is right now. You'll be embarrassed.
That's so. It's interesting because there's a I think of comedians when I think about this kind of concept a lot, because comedians will come up with a joke, premise for a story or something like that, or a bit. And there's two types of comedians. One of them will write everything down in a journal and they have to kind of like flush it out and see if there's something there. And the other kind says, if I remember it, it was good enough to stick around. If I don't remember it, it sucks or something, so it is interesting.
I think I attribute both of those kind of mindsets. There's some times where I'm about to fall asleep at night and I'll come up with an idea and I'll say, you know what, I'm going to forget this, but if I wake up in the morning and I remember it, it's good enough to remember. I never remember it, ever. Never happens. But yeah,
that one time out of 100 that it does happen, though, it was worth it or something, right?
It's not that I'll wake up and I'll remember it. It's that I'll feel it's important enough. Well, I'll force myself to get up and write it down. That's when I remember it. So, okay. And you know what? I resonate with that comedian thing, because a lot of times I'll come up with a joke that's just so dark. And this is how I know that my wife is the one, is that I'll tell her that dark joke and she'll laugh at it. I'm like, there's nobody else on planet Earth I could tell this joke to that they will find funny. So having somebody to be that sounding board that you could just say the stupidest things to is also very helpful.
That's awesome. That's actually really cool. It's like, I think a lot of us with partners, we can really kind of identify with that. It's that kind of sounding board where it's like, okay, am I crazy for putting this out there in the world, or is this, thumbs up from you? And then sometimes you get that feedback and you're like, well, she said it was cool and I'm putting it out there and no one else even understands it. But hey, it's all good.
It's not even about like having something that you could run with and actually make with the story. It's just having somebody that won't judge you for the crazy things that come into your head. She'll never judge me for the most ridiculous stuff. So even though she isn't a comic book fan, she doesn't read 90% of my work, just being there to listen to my stupid ideas, that's enough,
Yeah. No, and I'm agreeing with you saying stupid ideas, but only because I'm thinking about it in my own situation. It's like my own stupid ideas. I definitely I do on this channel. I do a booty cover of the week, and it's just something because I always thought it was fun because everyone always focuses on the T in TNA. And I was like, it'd be fun to focus on the A in TNA. And sure enough, I had this idea. My wife's like, no, do it. Like, that's your personality. Like, do it. I'm like, okay, if you're not embarrassed by me doing that and you encourage it, that's an idea. And people actually kind of responded to it. So that's kind of cool. Silly and dumb, but hey, I mean, sometimes life should be silly and dumb, right?
I think life should always be silly and dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not here for that long. So
I'm gonna hit one more question that came through, and then we will do our last ad break, and just so everybody knows, after the ad break, we're going to talk about Phenom, which is Frank's upcoming comic book. So we are going to get to that. So if you have any questions specifically about Phenom, make sure you get those in the chat. The last question that came through that I saw was this one from over on Twitch. Dev forever. I don't really know how to pronounce your handle. I'm so sorry. But do you have an obligation to make sure marginalized people are represented in your storytelling? Frank, do you have an answer for that one?
We broke up for a little bit, but I saw
the question. Sorry. The question was, do you have
I see the question. Do you have an obligation to make sure marginalized people are represented in your storytelling? Not every story, but it is on my mind for some stories. So it depends on story to story. It is, the weird thing about making sure that marginalized people are represented is that I don't consider myself a marginalized person. So it's hard to tell other people's story in your story. You want to make sure that people aren't ostracized from your story. You want to make sure that your stories are inclusive, and sometimes that includes bringing marginalized people in, but you want to get that perspective in your storytelling. So it's a tricky balance between making sure that your story is being told the way you wanted to tell it, while also making sure that it's inclusive. So it's a case by case basis is basically my answer.
I
Yes,
think that's a great answer.
it's on my mind. It's not something that's not like I don't think about it at all. Yeah, I do think about it. I want to represent people. I want to tell other people's stories. But at the same time, I don't want to tell other people's stories if it's not my story to tell. So it's you got to be careful with it.
I completely understand that perspective. I think it's one of those things that's it can be difficult and a touchy subject these days, but like having it at mind, but not necessarily taking over the entire creative process is probably a really good approach.
I'll give you an example. I wrote a novel about white supremacists. It gets very dark, very deep, very heavy, and I'm Jewish, so I can write the Jewish perspective from that novel very well. I can't write the Hispanic perspective. I can't write the Black perspective. I try to, but I need to reach out to people and get their opinion and get their feedback, so to make sure that I'm not doing things in an inappropriate way. So you want to be true to yourself, but you want to be respectful at the same time, which is not easy.
Yeah, no, it is definitely a balancing act to do that for sure. Cool. Well, and there are a few more comments I will get to that are shout outs and awesomeness. I will get to those after our last ad break here, as we will discuss Phenom a little bit here after the ad break, which is the upcoming comic book that Frank has coming out. Again, if you want to go check it out after the stream or have another browser window open or something like that, it is in the link. The link is in the description below. So make sure you go do that, as well as some other places you can check out Frank's work, like over on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and also his website as well. So make sure you go check that out. We are going to take our last ad break here, where we can talk about some other things coming up on the EXP and some of our sponsors, so we can thank them. And then we'll be right back to discuss Phenom with Frank.
Do you remember what it was like when you were a little kid and you got a letter in the mail? Now imagine that letter was filled with information about your favorite shows, pop culture questions, links to things you're going to want to see later, and even sneak peeks at upcoming programming here on The Experience. That's what the EXP mailing list is. Every week, we send you sneak peeks, information, and all of the relevant links for all of the shows you want to see. Sign up now on our website or scan the QR code that's on your screen right now.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. That was a nice short break for us, so we can spend the rest of our time that we have with Frank talking about his upcoming comic book, Phenom, which is launching here soon on Kickstarter. Before that, we had a couple people that just wanted to say hi. Travis, awesome dude over on Facebook. Go check him out. Frank Martin is one of the best in the business. He knows quality comics, Travis. So there's a little bit of a shout out for you. Thanks, Travis.
Travis is just inflating my ego to pop it later. That's all. He has an agenda.
That's awesome. Deet says, yo, and Deet, I just got to say, loved you in Howard the Duck. You were the bomb in Howard the Duck, man. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And then Diggs, BTW7 over on Twitch says, hey, what's up? Have a good stream. Hey, thanks for popping in and saying hi. We appreciate it. So that brings us to kind of the star of the show, so to speak, in some ways, your upcoming comic book. Like you said earlier, it's your first superhero comic book that you've written. I got a chance to check out a little bit of it, but I do want to give you the chance to describe it in your own words for people. So, what is Phenom? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So, Phenom is he's kind of a Superman archetype, but he can shapeshift. So he when he's on Earth, he looks like a human. When he's on a different planet, he looks like the native species of that planet. And he goes from planet to planet, pretending to be the native species and the hero, the superhero of that planet. And then he goes off-world and becomes the hero of a different planet. And I wanted to get at the mindset and the psychology of somebody who does something like that, who pretends to be the native hero of every planet that he goes to.
Yeah, and it is a cool concept. I won't spoil too much, but I imagine it takes place very early in the story. The sample I was sent, is that the very beginning of the story?
I think it's about half of the story.
Okay. So I don't think it'll be a spoiler to say that kind of seeing the transition moment where he goes from Earth to another planet is very interesting.
No. I would say so that's just the premise, and I always lead with the premise because that's the general idea of the story. The plot of the story is that he goes to one of these planets that he's protecting, and he finds it destroyed. It's some apocalyptic thing happens, and he has to try to figure out what happened and kind of come to terms with the fact that he wasn't there to protect it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's the non-spoiler premise of the story.
Well, I think it is interesting. I hope you don't think this is in any way reductive. Obviously you said it's a Superman allegory. For me, the thing that I immediately thought of, probably because I read it somewhat recently, I read it before like the first season of the show came on. I read through all of Invincible. It took me a long time to get to Invincible compared to most people. Because I think I was reading Robert Kirkman and reading zombie stuff, and I was like, do I really want to read the superhero stuff? And sure enough, the show was coming out. I'm like, that looks really good. I should probably read the whole comic. So I just read the whole thing. And for me, there's a little bit of I'm not trying to really compare it, but it's reminding me a little bit of Invincible. And what I mean by that is that there is kind of like a next level for that Superman archetype type character, because we've seen a lot of there's 100 Hyperion or all these different characters that are basically Superman, right? And to see a Superman story that I think is interesting, it has to have some other thing going on, right? It has to be an ancient species that goes planet to planet and tries to conquer them. It has to be a story like Phenom where there is something more going on. It's not just one-dimensional, here's Superman in this world, but this is actually Superman in almost all worlds, and how he's going to react differently to different things. As a jumping off point, it's a great concept. How much of that, when you were designing the story, how much of it did you want to be a subversion of that archetype, or how much of it was just you were in love with the idea of the concept of somebody who's taking on that kind of role for each world they're in? Like, was it kind of a chicken and the egg thing, or did it come together at the same time?
I think it was a little bit of both. I didn't want to tell a story that was just like another superhero story that was just like, here's this hero that wants to fight this villain, and they're going to battle, and then somebody comes out on top. I wanted to have a reason to tell this story. I wanted to have a purpose behind it. I wanted to dive into the psychology of this individual and formulate a plot that really tests who he is and challenges his mission as a hero. And so, yeah, it wasn't just a matter of telling a superhero story of this Superman archetype just to do it. It was really a high concept thing that I could get behind, that I can put my heart into, and that I really believed in.
Cool. So after, finally, we talked about you kind of sort of genre hopping, for lack of a better term. When you finally landed on the superhero genre, was there anything that was challenging to you, or noteworthy in how different it was, or was it kind of just like slipping on a different suit? How did that kind of experience go for you?
We read so much like Marvel and DC growing up, and I find them to be very dialogue heavy. Like in the beginning of the story, I have Phenom, protecting Earth and then going to a whole bunch of other planets, and it's very silent. I didn't really want to load it with dialogue and captions and voiceover to get into Phenom's mindset. I just wanted it to be silent and have people just witness his journey. And then the other day I was thinking, like, if this was a Marvel story, there would be captions all over the place. They love to just pound you with words and ideas to get into this character's head. So I don't know if that's like an editorial thing that's what they like to do,
I
but
think so.
the fact that I just kept it very silent and just bland and just you following along with this character's journey was something that I liked, that I did, that I didn't feel like somebody else was imposing on me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Comic Tropes in chat says they used to try to jam more story into a single issue so it had more dialogue. That's a good point too. The type of storytelling really has changed over the decades. I remember when it used to be all thought bubbles and a lot of inner monologue happening, and all that type of stuff too. It was definitely a very different. The example I keep coming back to is I recently reread Transformers from the Marvel series. Like I read some of the early issues over again, and there is so much exposition in the first couple issues of Transformers that it's just like it's just crazy, just walls of text, and there's like these tiny robots in the background of the panels almost. It's different styles.
That might come from my background in prose, where we're traditionally shown, taught show don't tell. We have to show what the story is all about. We can't just tell people what's going on. So I was perfectly comfortable to just let my words fall to the background and let the art tell the story.
Yeah, no, I think that it's really cool, and it is one of those things that as a reader, I do find myself kind of adjusting to every comic book. Like it's kind of probably similar to if you watch a lot of foreign films, you kind of have to almost okay, what kind of storytelling am I watching? Am I watching a very visual storytelling? Is it a lot of dialogue? Is it a lot of directorial storytelling where there's a lot of cinematography or something like that going on? Comic books sometimes be that way because some issues introduce you with a lot of quick cuts and action to kind of show you a montage of things, and then some do it through dialogue or exposition. So you kind of have to navigate the waters you're swimming. One thing I'm curious about is kind of and I do want to be respectful of time. I know you're 4 time zones ahead of me right now and probably looking forward to getting to sleep somewhat soon. I did have one question for you, though, about this, which, first of all, can you tell me who the artist was on Phenom again? Because I didn't quite catch the artist.
His name is Ruli Akbar. I've been working with him. He's a foreign artist. I've been working with him for like variant covers and stuff. And I wanted to give him a shot doing some sequentials. And I think he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it's really cool. I do hope people get a chance to check it out because I was pretty impressed with the visuals too. I think probably noticed it a lot because, like you said, it's not necessarily a lot of dialogue or text in the early part that I saw, especially. So you kind of are relying on the visuals. And then for me, I always go back and think about how was the story written out, plotted to get to that point. So that's kind of my question for you. I'm always curious about the dynamic between a writer and an illustrator when it comes to comic books. As far as how much detail you give the artist in the script. Are you, hey, here's the panel and here's what I want it to look at and describe every single detail? Are you trying to get more of the artist's interpretation of what that's supposed to look like? Like, what's your system for developing that with your illustrators?
I try to provide just as much direction as to tell the story that I want to tell. Any other details is up to them. Okay. So sometimes if I want a building to look a specific way, I'll provide a reference point. Sometimes if I want a specific angle, because I think it will provide the reader with a certain thought, I'll say, no, look, I don't want you to do this angle. I want you to do this angle. Then other times they'll different angle, but the story doesn't change. So I'll say, fine, that angle works better. So it's really case by case basis. It's at the end of the day, I'm a terrible designer, a visual artist. I don't really know what I'm doing. So I rely a lot on them to kind of guide me. But I when I get their layouts or I get their pencils, I know what I'm looking at and I know what kind of story I want to tell. So it's my directions. I don't like telling people to change things. I don't want to have to go back to them and say, fix this. So I'm very pointed. And when I do tell them to change things, it's for a very specific reason.
For sure. No, and something that, again, I was mentioning, like, I'd love to write comic books someday, or, especially when I was a kid, that's what I wanted to do. So the meat and potatoes is always fascinating to me, whereas I don't know if it's interesting to everybody else, but I always thought that relationship is interesting because I've talked to different, probably a lot more artists than writers, and hearing their interpretation of the directions they're giving is always interesting. And I've been talking to more writers recently, so I've kind of been trying to get, hey, what are you putting out there for people, and what kind of struggles and kind of things have you encountered with that? It's always interesting to get the answers for that, but I think it's cool that most writers, that I've seen make good content, say that they want to leave a lot of it up to the artist to kind of bring their strength to the table too, right? That's important.
One of the things that I love is when they put out director's cuts of like first issues and they put the script in the back. And I love like going back and forth, looking between what's on the script and what actually winds up on the page. I used to do just straight bare bones issues of digital comics. I don't really do that anymore. I do digital deluxe, where I put the script in the back. So if anybody wants to see how I write my scripts and how they wind up in the finished product, they're more than welcome to take a peek at it.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I think a lot of people appreciate that, that are into, especially those of us that have been reading comic books for a long time. We're kind of curious about how things come together. So pretty soon we have Phenom launching, like Jay mentioned in the chat, highlighted up above there a little bit. You should go click on notify on launch on the Kickstarter launch page. Like I mentioned a couple times, that is in the description below if you want to go click and do that to make sure you are notified on launch. Anything you want to tell us specifically about the Kickstarter? Anything you want to tease us? Anything we should know as viewers watching, looking forward to this launch? Anything you want to talk about?
No, just that it's launching March 5th. It's my first superhero story. I'm super proud of it, and I can't wait to go to bed.
Absolutely, man. In the meantime, for people that are interested in this concept, could you maybe give us like 2 or 3 recommendations that people should go read if they kind of want to of your work that they want to maybe go check out before they read Phenom that might be good leads into this?
That's a deep question. I have a book called Cabin 818. That's a very meta kind of story about me as a comic writer. What else do I have? My series Grim Space is a sci-fi fairy tale series that kind of plays in space and it's basically taking fairy and folk tales and spinning them into a Star Wars-esque universe. So if you enjoy space and this story obviously takes place with aliens, it kind of works in that too. And Chris said Hospice was awesome. So, which is something completely different about cannibals.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that's kind of the takeaway I had is really go look and see what maybe kind of looks interesting that Frank has done and check that out, because there's probably, whatever genre you're in, there's probably something that's close to it that you can go check out. Are you still there, Frank? Because I think we may have lost you one last time here. I didn't have audio. Okay, we'll see if Frank comes back in here. We'll see. But I was going to tell people, make sure you go bookmark the launch page for Phenom. And in addition to that, like I said, we are doing this kind of a special show. It's not going to be something that happens all the time. We are doing this on my channel as well as over on the EXP. You can check us out regularly every Monday over on the EXP channel, their Twitch, their X page, over on Facebook, or over on the YouTube channel, which is probably one of the better ways to watch, because we will be able to see your comments directly and all talk to each other there. But if you want to go do that, feel free to go join up and become a subscriber over there.
I'm still
welcome
here.
back, Frank. Excellent. Sorry, we lost you for long enough. We weren't sure if it was a permanent break.
You would think the internet would be best at 12 o'clock at night when nobody's on it, but
no competition. Well, all the people are playing Fortnite in their hotel rooms and doing other things I won't mention. And, but yeah, I just wanted to mention, make sure you go bookmark that page for the click on notify on launch for Frank's Phenom, as well as checking us out over on Devil's Advocates. Normally we're at 7:30 p.m. Pacific / 10:30 Eastern. We did a little bit special showtime to kind of help push things a little bit earlier. for Frank here. And then also, I just wanted to plug our upcoming shows we have coming up on the EXP for the next few days. Tomorrow, Tuesdays on the EXP, you can always check out The Minute to Skim It with Miss Jen, Kyle, and Jay at 7 Eastern, 6 Central. Right after that, we also have Mint Hunter Comics that's going to be on. Check out James at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central. And then at the end of the night, we'll have Kicking It with Henri Compton. Go check him out. He's an awesome dude, great comic book seller. 10 Eastern, 9 Central on that one. And folks, we really appreciate you being here. We are going to let Frank go get some sleep in his hotel room. Hopefully, his nice, comfy bed. And thanks again for joining us, Frank. We're looking forward to your launch. We'll definitely be checking in with you after the launch and seeing how that works. And hopefully, you have a really great one. I really think this is a cool book. And congratulations on launching your first superhero comic book, man. All right. I think maybe we lost Frank again. Perfect timing. Chris is going to be there March 5th. So am I as well. Thanks for joining the show, everybody. We'll see you again next Monday at our normal time for Devil's Advocates over on the EXP. And I hope everybody has a fantastic night. Thanks for being here today, and we'll talk to you in the next one.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.